right, hi everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar today. A team effort balancing energy efficiency and reimagining the office space. Today we have panelists from 3 industry leading programs, Green Lease Leaders, Urban Land Institute's Tenant Energy Optimization Program, and ENERGY STAR Tenant Space to demonstrate how these programs work together to guide building owners and tenants in optimizing energy savings in the rapidly changing work environment. Next slide, please. So for our agenda today, I will start by introducing our panelists, then walk through emerging trends and challenges that are impacting the built environment, and then provide an overview of how these programs complement one another. From there, each of our panelists will present on their various programs, and then we will walk through a case study, putting these practices into action, and then wrap up with Q&A. If you guys have questions throughout the presentation, just submit them through the chat, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So these are our wonderful panelists for today. Hannah Debelius is a Science, Technology, and Policy Fellow in the Building Technologies Office of the U.S. Department of Energy, supporting the Better Buildings program to catalyze energy efficiency in the commercial real estate and higher education sectors. Emily Pierce is the director of the Greenprint Center for Building Performance at the Urban Land Institute. Through this role, she helps real estate owners, developers, and managers cultivate energy efficiency and sustainability. She also leads ULI's only tenant-focused program, the Tenant Energy Optimization Program, otherwise known as TEOP, which promotes sustainable and efficient build-outs in leased spaces. Craig Haglin is a National Program Manager with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's ENERGY STAR Commercial Buildings Program. In his role, he leads program work with commercial real estate and multifamily sectors, working with building owners and managers to help them improve energy management practices and reduce energy consumption in their portfolios. And in 2020, he helped launch the ENERGY STAR Tenant Space recognition and leads outreach efforts for commercial office tenants. Next slide, please. So before we go into each of our panelists' presentations, let's discuss emerging trends and challenges. Next slide, please. So first, why do building emissions matter? When evaluating the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, buildings outpace agriculture, transportation, and industrial pollutants, equating to 40%. With the pandemic reducing building occupancy under 10% between April and May, most would have expected consumption to dramatically plummet as well. However, data from the Energy Information Administration has shown electricity is only reduced between 19 to 23%. If buildings were empty, why did we not see a greater reduction in energy consumption? Of course, those are a variety of reasons, but one in particular we're going to explore a bit further. Next slide, please. So buildings with multiple tenants did not achieve significant savings when occupancy reached below 10%. The reason can be attributed to the fact that neither tenant or landlord on their own have complete control of buildings' energy use. The usage is generally split between the two parties. Traditional lease structures that don't address energy management fail to address changes in building operations. And we'll dive into this into the next slide. A building cannot shut down and ensure a healthy work environment, but buildings can stagger the start and shut down of equipment, but often the lease prohibits that. And then also lighting only accounts for about 50 to 20% of energy load, and the amount under the operator's control varies. Often tenant spaces have wired general lighting that remains on 24/7. And then majority of buildings plug load energy use comes from tenants. and the lease does not require tenants to manage more efficiently non-essential equipment during off hours. And next slide, please. So generally speaking, we can't point to one specific problem. It is a combination of various factors that contribute to how efficient or inefficient a building is, which you'll see these various factors listed here: building age, lease agreements, access to financing, occupant use, and operator knowledge. Next slide, please. So there's 7 most common hurdles. Include things like traditional leases, like we've mentioned, omitting sustainability and efficiency. Tenants are not in the business of operating buildings, so engagement in changing occupant behavior is often challenging. And then there's often a disconnect between the leasing team and the terms they negotiate versus the space, how the space is operated and maintained. The lease often misses opportunities to introduce processes that ensure efficiency goals, and oftentimes these misses can be costly operating expenditures down the line. And then also thinking about B and C class office buildings, tenants mostly, but even large tenants, are not aware of the various programs available to them to fund efficiency projects. Next slide, please. So despite the hurdles, there is a growing demand for building-related emissions reductions. Policies, we're starting to see more building performance standards that are popping up in a total of 4 jurisdictions now, which are to help these cities and states meet their climate goals. The Biden-Harris plan aims to upgrade energy efficiency in 4 million buildings. Reporting and transparency is another driver. Investors are increasingly requiring transparency through reporting frameworks like RES, which is a reporting tool for providing environmental, social, and governance data to investors. And GRESB has become an industry-driven organization with more than 250 members that use that data to manage risk in their real estate portfolio. And then lastly, the economics. Green buildings are profitable, they're cost effective, and they're good for the economy. Operating cost savings, shorter payback periods, increased asset value, these are things that have become proven, which are increasing these green buildings. Next slide, please. And so moving into programs that help you achieve these building-related emissions reductions, you can move to the next slide. So Green Lease Leaders, ULI, TEOP, and ENERGY STAR Tenant Space. These programs guide building owners and tenants in optimizing energy savings. Building types vary across all 3 programs, except for office. If you're an office building, combining the guidance from these 3 programs can help achieve deep energy savings and reductions in building emissions. All programs require landlord-tenant collaboration. And just to specify on the variation between the 3, Green Lease Leaders and ENERGY STAR Tenant Space offer recognition, whereas ULI TEOP is a 10-step process guide. We'll go into further detail into how each of these programs overlap and differ in the coming slides. So each of these programs provide guidance on key strategies to implement throughout the leasing process. This table shows where those strategies overlap, and that guidance overlaps. These programs build on one another, so meeting ENERGY STAR Tenant Space criteria can help you meet requirements for Green Lease Leaders and ULI TEOP and vice versa. Advancing building energy and carbon reductions requires integrating a combination of these strategies across all 3 programs. And next slide. And I will pass things off to Hannah DeBillius to talk about the Green Lease Leaders program.
Great, thanks so much, Allison. So as you mentioned, I am with the U.S. Department of Energy, a fellow there, and I am working with the Better Buildings program, which is in partnership with IMT on the first program we'll talk about today, which is the Green Lease Leaders program. Go to the next slide. So just a little bit of a level set, of course, on what a green lease is. And it's one high impact tool to address a building's footprint. So also known as a high performance lease, it creates a win-win agreement for building owners and tenants to equitably align the costs and benefits of energy and water efficiency investments for both parties. This is across a variety of building sectors and it has a lot of diversity, but has seen an incredible amount of success in the commercial real estate sector, which we were talking about today. Go to the next slide. So a green lease aligns the financial line, save money, conserve resources, and ensure the efficient use and optimization of buildings. Of course, it has the goals to eliminate that split incentive, creating the win-win there. And then also increase the value and productivity of lease spaces. And that's both through the building systems themselves and also, as measured through occupant wellness. A study with Stoke revealed to us that the potential to reduce energy consumption in an office building through green leasing is between 11 and 22%. And it can reduce utility bills by up to over 50 cents per square foot. So there could be a really significant impact here in utilization of green leasing. Go to the next slide. So just a little bit more about defining what a green lease is. As I've mentioned, it aligns the landlord and tenant priorities and promotes environmental goals and lease. So at a minimum, it establishes the priorities for both parties, a sustainability point of contact on either side of the lease, which I know we've seen has been particularly helpful during the last couple of months where there's a need for increased communication there. It prioritizes how building and tenant space overall will operate and also enables the ability to report progress. Go to the next slide, please. So, whether you're striving for a certification under one of these systems or you're looking for increased recognition for your organization, a green lease can really provide the mechanism to help you reach all of these goals. And it does that through, really helping with clear communication and transparency around both the goals that you have and the progress. I want to talk a little bit more specifically now about the Green Lease Leaders program. As I mentioned, this has been a partnership between IMT and the Department of Energy's Better Buildings program. And it established an industry standard and is a recognition program for organizations on the tenant and owner side of a lease. So 29 organizations that own or manage, and that equates to more than 1 billion square feet of floor space have been recognized already through this program. And altogether, Green Lease Leaders manages nearly 3 billion square feet of the US commercial and government space, representing a huge potential for growth in green leases. In the commercial sector alone, green leasing has a potential to affect 8% of the leased space nationwide. I can go to the next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of the 2020 companies that are recognized as Green Lease Leaders. And we'll talk a little bit more about case studies later in the program today, but a lot of these also have case studies that you can access online to learn more about the tactics they use to receive this level of recognition. Next slide, please. Yeah, what I also want to highlight is the growth that we've seen on the tenant side of things and tenants applying for recognition, which is important because it really demonstrates the market demand for efficiency that's coming from tenants. Showing that they're also asking for these win-win agreements and to address the split incentive. Go to the next slide. So Green Lease Leaders sets the standard and also a clear process to transform a traditional lease across all sector types here. There's also a suite of resources and soon you'll also see more resources and adaptations. Next slide, please. So if Green Lease Leaders, if our first program has piqued your interest here, or you're looking to combine the different programs to your benefit today, one of the first steps for Green Lease Leaders is to complete a lease audit, which is free and easy to access. You go to greenleaseleaders.com and you can see where you stand right now. I am looking at our participant list, and it looks like some familiar names where you might already have green lease clauses in your corporate leases that you might be able to just add to or tweak a little bit in order to qualify for the Green Lease Leaders program recognition. Then the second step is that you can contact IMT for one-on-one assistance. As I said, this is a partnership program that we run, and IMT has an incredible amount of subject matter experts or a lot of expertise within their experts where they can help you there. And then finally, you can visit greenleaseleaders.com and actually apply for this recognition by March 31st, 2021. That's the deadline for the application for this year, and then the actual recognition piece happens through Better Buildings in May. So we hope to see a lot of new faces there. And that's the end for me. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you, Hannah, and thank you to DOE and to IMT, to everyone. We're very happy to be a part of this webinar. I'm very excited to talk with you all today about the intersection of all of our programs. So for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Emily Pierce. I'm director on ULI's Greenprint Center for Building Performance. You can go to the next slide. So, I'm seeing, I like the Zoom meeting. I kind of feel a little bit like I'm in a room with all of you guys, enjoying a cup of coffee or for a cocktail. But I'm guessing that most of you are familiar on some level with ULI and Greenprint. But to give a quick rundown, if you're not, ULI, the Urban Land Institute, is a real estate stakeholder membership-based organization. And we have about 45,000 members worldwide. And Greenprint specifically is one of the 3 arms that are our sustainability team, our Center for Sustainability and Economic Performance. The other 2 are our Urban Resilience and our Building Healthy Places team. So Greenprint, whereas resilience is a little bit more climate adaptation, Greenprint is climate mitigation. So we focus on carbon emissions reductions, greenhouse gas emissions reductions, all that good stuff. And the way that looks like for us is we have a cohort of about 44 or so real estate owners and investors who have collectively committed to, as of this year, 2 goals, 2 voluntary goals. Not everyone falls into both of the categories, but initially our goal on Greenprint, our voluntary goal was 50% carbon emissions reduction by 2030. And just this year, we added that second voluntary opt-in goal for net zero carbon operations by 2050. And we're very excited to do so, knowing that that's where the market's headed. That's where we really want to see buildings move towards. So Greenprint as a community, as a network of best practice sharing, does a number of things to help the market move in that direction. Best practice sharing, knowledge sharing, and we do an annual benchmark data report that tracks and displays members' progress towards that goal. You can go to the next slide here. So Greenprint membership spans a wide variety of asset types, of company sizes, real estate company sizes, geographic regions. As you can see here on the snapshot of who our members are, it's not one size fits all. We have a wide variety of members, and what's particularly cool and unique for this webinar is that a number of our members have had experience with a variety of the programs that we're talking about today. So these are market leaders in the energy and sustainability space in real estate. So it's particularly unique to be able to kind of bring everything full circle for that today. Next slide. So to bring this kind of back down home to the tenant level, like we've been talking about, what I'm really going to hone in on for the rest of for the rest of my part here today is going to be TEOP. And so, you heard Allison and Hannah mention this earlier, but this is the Tenant Energy Optimization Program. So this is ULI's tenant-focused series of 10 steps and best practices that are specifically aimed at the point of a tenant fit out. So with the understanding that whenever there's a tenant fit out in a lease space, so a tenant improvement, a TI, a new lease, there's tremendous opportunity, excuse me, to integrate energy efficiency to optimize the energy of that space and to overall improve the sustainability. There's obviously opportunity throughout the operation and maintenance and longevity of that building, but at that point of a fit out, there's a unique opportunity that you don't necessarily get at every other point in a building's life cycle or in a space's life cycle. So it's a series of 10 steps, which I'll get into specifically what those steps are in a moment. But what I want to highlight here, number one, that it's a free and open program. So if you go to that tenantenergy.uli.org website, you can download not only the 10 steps, an infographic with all of them, but a number of case studies, complementary resources, all sorts of good stuff to help you understand the program. And then the second thing that I'll highlight here on this slide is the proven results. So this isn't just a nice to have process that may or may not get you anywhere. This is a proven model that can really help you not only save energy, so to the tune of that 30 to 50%, and these numbers you see here are just averages, but it can also save you money. And on the financial front, there's a relatively quick payback when you follow these 10 TEOP steps. So if you look at that 3 to 5 year, again, this is an average range. Some of the programs have been much quicker than that. They have the proven energy savings, the proven financial savings, and they have a relatively quick payback, which is particularly important when you're thinking about tenant fit outs and the timelines and the needs for those companies leading them. Next slide, please. So I know there's a lot on this, numerical table you see here with lots of numbers and lots of figures. And if you're, really into the data, you probably want to spend, 10 minutes looking at this. But for the interest of time, what I'll call your attention to is those end columns. So the company column and then the payback in years. When TEOP first started, so at this point 5-6 years ago, most of the companies that were part of our initial pilot bucket, which is what you see here, most of them did not have public corporate sustainability initiatives. That's not to say that they didn't care about sustainability or they didn't care about environmental, but in the early mid-2000s, most companies were not making large, splashy, loud public climate and greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Why that's important and why I bring it up here is because when you're dealing with tenants that don't necessarily have that as a core mission, it's really important to be able to prove the financial business case behind it and to also have as quick as possible as a payback. If you're able to demonstrate that there's a relatively quick turnaround in order to get that financial return back, as you can see there, that 3 to 5 year average, but some of them were more like 1 to 2 years. That's particularly important. And when you think about the level of savings, this is pretty significant and pretty, the business case is definitely there when you think about following these steps. Next slide, please. So what you see here are the actual 10 steps. I've kind of teased a few times about the 10 steps, and here you can see what those actual 10 steps are. They're broken into 3 phases. So we have the pre-lease, design and construction, and the occupancy or post-occupancy phase. What I want to explain about this whole slide before I kind of highlight some of the specific steps, and you heard this mentioned earlier. TEOP is a program, it's a roadmap, it's a process, it's not a recognition program. You walk through TEOP with the intent to save money, to save energy, to put your lease space in a better energy efficiency and sustainability place. Whereas Green Lease Leaders and ENERGY STAR Tenant Space, that you actually get a formal recognition from. And I'll go into in just a second how these all go hand in hand and how they can kind of marry up with each other and you can walk through them simultaneously to better your situation. But I do just want to call that out, and that's what you see there with that arrow kind of pointing down to, you know, whether it be USGBC or Living Building Challenge or BREEAM or Green Lease Leader, what have you. TEOP can help you get there, so that's kind of that funnel, but it is not competing with them as far as a recognition program. So just make that clear as we're thinking about this. And real quick here, I'll go into a little bit more detail about the individual steps. So that pre-lease phase is when you're going to be, what I like to think of as building the foundation. You're selecting your team, you're selecting your space, really making sure that you're setting the stage for all of the more implementation-based steps that you'll be following during that fit out in later months, weeks, days, depending on how long your timeline is. On the design and construction phase, this is going to be more of the nitty-gritty, the mathematical, the financial. This is when you're going to be not only just setting your energy performance goals, but you're going to be modeling your energy, calculating financial returns, using all of this data to make educated and knowledgeable decisions for that fit out, so that you're really setting the stage for the occupancy phase. And building the space out in the most energy optimized manner that you can. And then lastly, those steps 9 and 10, that post-occupancy phase, these are really all about, or mostly about communication. So communication and maintaining the plans that you've set in space. So, I'm guessing that most of us here on this call know that, you can build a super efficient space, you can build something that's really, really sustainable, but if you're not maintaining and if you're not operating it in an energy efficient and sustainable manner, you're really doing yourself a disservice, and you're doing the building or the space a disservice. So those steps 9 and 10 are really about making sure that you're executing the plan you put in place, as well as maintaining that landlord-tenant communication. Next slide. So I will end here, and I will pass it over to Craig in just a moment. But one thing that I did want to call out and kind of segue into Craig, and where Craig is going to go into more about ENERGY STAR Tenant Space and everything EPA is doing. But ULI recently put out a joint resource with EPA, with the ENERGY STAR Tenant Space program, to mirror and to walk through exactly what I was saying a second ago, how TEOP is not a recognition program, but it can help you get recognition through the tenant space program. So this is just I'm not expecting anyone to be able to read the small print there. This is just a snapshot to show you what the resource looks like. And there is a URL that you'll be able to click on in the end of the slide that you'll get after the fact. But this document is really helpful to show how important all of the steps are, but a lot of those steps in the design and construction that can really set you up for success in not only checking all of the boxes on TEOP, but then eventually getting that ENERGY STAR Tenant Space recognition.
Great, thanks, Emily. Go ahead, Craig.
All right, great. Thanks so much. Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Craig Haglin. I work on the EPA's commercial buildings program. I lead our work with commercial real estate and multifamily, but also have been involved heavily with the development over the past few years here of a new initiative for tenant spaces, the ENERGY STAR Tenant Space recognition, which launched just a couple months ago, so fairly new, sort of throwing our hat in the ring along with ULI and DOE in terms of addressing efficiency at the tenant level. And happy that these programs are built in a way that have proven success, but also support one another. Next slide, please. Thanks. So in terms of a little background on the Tenant Space Initiative, it started with the Energy Efficiency Improvement Act of 2015. It actually was a piece of legislation that was passed, which directed EPA to develop recognition for commercial tenant spaces. And while it was a piece of legislation that Congress passed, the original impetus was commercial real estate industry wanting to address this. They had been involved with their own energy management programs, with ENERGY STAR for whole buildings, and they wanted something to address sort of the next frontier, which is efficiency at the tenant level. So it really was a collaborative effort from the start to get this in, and we've taken that and built on that. There's a couple components that was in that piece of legislation. One was to develop a criteria for spaces that are in design and fit out, so sort of a specification setting, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. There was another piece there that was to ask EPA to look into developing a performance-based model similar to what we do for whole buildings. If anyone's familiar with that, we have ENERGY STAR certification, which is based on a 1 to 100 score. And that score is based off of a national survey of whole buildings and the data in that data set. We actually don't have that data set for tenant spaces yet. Trying to work with DOE and others are interested in collecting that, but it's a very involved process and takes a number of years to do that. So we hope to get that down the road. But that's why our current recognition here has branched a little bit away of what we traditionally done in terms of performance-based models. And instead, we're addressing the sort of design and fit out criteria. But one element we've added onto that is spaces that are in operation and are occupied can also apply through this criteria. We did a pilot in 2018 with the criteria, which I'll discuss in a couple slides. We had great participation at the end of it. Took about a year. We had 50 tenant spaces that participated there and earned recognition that were known as charter tenants. Great results from them. From a service provider who did their space, said that as soon as they installed meters, which is a component of it, people started paying attention to energy more, and they actually saw a reduction in energy use over that time. But quite a big range of participants. We had technology firms, LinkedIn and Salesforce participated, Samsung. We had commercial real estate firms who both worked with their tenants to get them involved, but also their tenants themselves. So they submitted their spaces in their offices. So quite a big range of participation. So we had good results from that, a lot of valuable input in which we move forward to shape the main criteria. Next slide, please. So the sort of purpose and the value of this kind of comes from a few different angles. On the tenant side, certainly having a recognition for tenants and encouraging them to adopt energy efficient practices where they not only can get those recognition, but they learn how their spaces are operating, I think is really important. In their spaces, we have a criteria item for lighting efficiency. If they pay their own bills, depending on the lease, they may see some financial improvements on that. But really it's about them getting control and understanding where their energy use is coming from to improve their performance there. But it also rolls up, of course, to the whole building and supports commercial real estate efforts. All of that efficiency in those tenant spaces contribute to the efficiency of the building and really provides an opportunity through the various criteria items to collaborate with their landlords around energy efficiency and sustainability, which fills a need in the market. Next slide, please. Just a couple differentiating points between the tenant space recognition and our whole building certification, which people are most familiar with. ENERGY STAR certification is our flagship program. It has the ENERGY STAR certification mark. You can see down there in the lower right of that slide for buildings. That is based on performance, 12 months of measured whole building energy data. The tenant space recognition does not require reporting of measured data. It does require metering, which I'll touch on, but you don't need to have 12 months of measured data. Although as tenants pursue this recognition, it does help that and support that whole goal of whole building efficiency. There's no requirement for a tenant space that has to be inside of an ENERGY STAR certified building. You can have 1, 2, 3 different tenant spaces that receive recognition in a building that isn't certified, but you can also have that building certified as well. So there's really no crossover there. Next slide, please. In terms of eligibility, there's a few requirements. At this point, our recognition is just for office space. We are in the process right now of scoping retail and warehouse for the tenant space. That will probably be a year or two in working with that in development. We hope to get that next, but right now it's just office. Within that, you have general administrative office, financial office, or non-diagnostic medical office, so a doctor's office without any diagnostic equipment. can include a data center if that's part of the office space. All of this is built into ENERGY STAR Portfolio Manager, so anyone familiar with that will have some familiarity with moving forward with the tenant space. You basically set up a part of a space and designate it as an office or financial office, and you'll get access to a separate module within Portfolio Manager. In terms of what we define a tenant space as, it is all the space that the tenant occupies in the building. We call it usable office square footage, but it won't be one floor that a tenant has when they occupy 2, 4, and 6. A tenant space is their presence within the building. So all of that is submitted as part of the recognition. And then finally, this recognition is just for spaces in the US. Next slide. In terms of recognition criteria, we have 5 items. The first is estimating energy use, and that is estimating, not measuring energy use. This sort of serves 2 purposes. One, it's really a placeholder for the future when we hope to have performance criteria when we get that data set and we can actually determine what is an efficient space and where that level is for energy use. So it's serving that need, but also it's important for tenants to get a sense of how much energy they're using. So we worked with the Department of Energy and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory to develop a calculator that takes into account all the different elements of a tenant space, equipment, sort of the building envelope, and other elements, lighting as well, and we'll give you a range for estimated energy. There's no performance requirement there. You just need to complete and provide the data points to get that estimate. Metering is the second requirement. This is by far the sort of most challenging unless you have meters, sub-meters already in place, but it's important for tenants to eventually understand how much energy they're actually using. You can't manage what you don't measure. So we do require tenants to meter all of the energy use that they are responsible for and that they have control of in the building. Typically, this is lighting and plug load. If there happens to be a rooftop unit that's specific for a tenant space or supplemental HVAC, need to meter that as well. But you do not need to meter any shared system, certainly no shared HVAC in the building. If there is a data center that is for the use of that tenant specifically, that needs to be metered separately. But if it's a shared data center that serves the whole building, that does not. There's also an accuracy requirement of plus or minus 2% accurate, which is slightly below utility grade, which gives some flexibility for tenants in choosing technologies at which to go with. The third is lighting efficiently. So this is the closest to a performance requirement that we have. The tenant will fill out their lighting inventory, all of the fixtures that they have in their space. And again, help of DOE and the Pacific Northwest National Lab, they developed a calculator that will take that lighting list and inventory and will spit out a lighting energy use intensity for this space. Also, the calculator will take into account other factors of the space, namely operating hours, and will come up with a lighting target. This is really 25% better than code is where we've set it for now. And a tenant will need to have what they have entered into the calculator as their lighting be at or below that target. That is done on a weighted average basis across all of their floors. If they happen to have one floor that's really efficient, one floor that needs to be lit for additional purposes, it'll calculate across the entire tenant space, all the floors or suites that you have, and come up with that evaluation. The fourth criteria item is using efficient equipment. For this, we went back and forth on whether to specify specific product types. In the end, we settled on requiring a procurement policy. This is also fairly flexible. It can be done at the site level. So looking at leasing, certainly going through Green Lease Leaders program, if you're talking about leasing, one thing that could be included is some sort of agreement on procuring efficient equipment, so you can satisfy it that way. It could be just for that tenant space in that building. It could also be a corporate policy. We have had tenant spaces come in, none that have received the recognition just yet, a few that have been reviewed and will be approved shortly, that are looking to get recognition for several tenant spaces across the country, and they have a corporate policy that covers all of that. That's totally fine as well. And then finally, sharing data. This again gets towards landlord-tenant collaboration in order to foster whole building data collection and whole building benchmarking, which is required for just generally knowing the footprint of that building, but also with a lot of city and state compliance mandates needing to have that data for that. Supports that as well. We require tenants to agree to share data with the landlord upon request. Last slide, please. And then finally, just a quick overview of the application process. We do have a lot of training. We have webinars that are going every now and then and recorded once to learn how to actually do this, but I'm not going to get into that today. In terms of general steps, what you do, very, very similar to the whole building certification process, if you're familiar with that. Again, it's built out in Portfolio Manager, so you'll first set up that space in Portfolio Manager, access that tenant module in part of an office building, and then complete all the data requirements. After you do all of that, it will give you the okay to proceed for applying for recognition. You'll fill out a few kind of general details, generate the application. One thing we do require, as we do with whole buildings, while this recognition is free, as well as all the ENERGY STAR programs that we have, we do require third-party verification, and that is to have a licensed professional come in and conduct a site visit, verifying the information in the application. The LP can be on staff if you have someone. We just require that professional designation issued by the local government to verify that data. Once that's done, everything else is online. You submit that through our online system within Portfolio Manager. If we have any questions, we will follow up. Our review team will follow up, and then you'll receive notification and the recognition after that, which will include both the letter congratulating. You'll receive a decal for the space, which you can put on the main suite, as well as a listing on our online database. And I think that's it for me.
Thanks, Craig. And next, we'll have Emily talk through a case study.
Awesome. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Craig. So I'm going to kind of bring all of this full circle. So I mentioned, well, all of us have mentioned at this point, how all of these programs connect together, how, they can marry up with each other and the steps go hand in hand. And what I want to do here is use an example of a case study that really brings a lot of this home and connects everything together. So this is specifically a case study that we recently published earlier this year through the Tenant Energy Optimization Program. And it is specifically about a tenant in the Boulder Commons building in Colorado. RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, was the tenant that we profiled. And while I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, and I went into some details about how TEOP really is at the point of a fit out for an existing space that's getting retrofitted, or TI. A lot of the steps in all of their essence can be applied even to new construction. I mean, what's really important to remember is that landlord-tenant collaboration that's happening, and then all of the ensuing steps to help actually implement and overcome some of the barriers that we see. Alison and Hannah mentioned some of the barriers that we see between different lease structures and collaboration. It can happen in existing spaces. It can happen in new construction. The essence of the steps are really what's important. So if you want to go to the next slide here. So what you saw on the previous slide was a picture of the Boulder Commons building. What we did for this TEOP case study was we profiled RMI, who leased space within that building. And why this is particularly unique and particularly relevant for this webinar is this space and this landlord-tenant collaboration really brings home all of these programs. So not only is it profiled at a really shining example of how to walk through the TEOP steps, they also, by they, I mean the owner, the tenant, RMI, and their broker achieved Green Lease Leader status in a few years ago in one of the Green Lease Leader cycles. They did slightly miss the boat on Craig and EPA's tenant space program, but maybe we can start working with them now to push them now that the full tenant space version is out. But this space is a really great example to talk about some of the specifics and how they did it. more so than all of that, and how it brings all these programs together, is the fact that this building in and of itself is really a unicorn in the green building space. Unfortunately, is still a bit of a unicorn. And I say that because it is a multi-tenant aspiring net zero energy building. So net zero is not new, it's not unheard of by any means, but a multi-tenant building that has multiple leases at play is still pretty rare in the space. A lot of the net zero buildings that we see in the DC area, in other states and other cities, are either owner occupied or there's just one tenant, which is all well and good. You know, we don't want to diminish those. We don't want to stop those buildings from going up and from companies trying to push those ahead. But when you add in the additional layer of complexity of multiple tenants and multiple leases in the space, it adds a potential for a lot of confusion. So what I'm going to talk about here, and I could take 45, 60 plus more minutes to talk about the nuances of this building, because it is a really, really cool space. I'm just going to focus on a few things today, and I'm going to go counterclockwise around this slide here. The first, and if you've been paying attention with even half an ear for the last hour or so, you'll know that we've toted landlord-tenant communication a whole lot so far. But the collaboration and communication between the tenant, RMI, and the owner, the landlord, which is Morgan Creek Ventures, a developer out in Colorado, the almost intense level, and I don't mean that badly, of collaboration and communication that went into this really set the stage for the success once the building was facility was in the ground, things have been constructed, we were moving ahead with operations and occupancy. RMI previously had a relationship with Morgan Creek, with the owner. They actually leased a space in a completely different building. But RMI, partly because of their mission-driven nonprofit focus, really wanted to find a space that was uber energy efficient. They were really aiming for net zero. They really wanted to be able to lease a space that embodied their values, that they saw that was where we needed to go, not only as a green building market, but that's where the energy sector and the country needs to be moving as far as our building stock. So they started trying to figure out how they could make that happen. Unfortunately, like I said, multi-tenant net zero buildings are still unfortunately a unicorn, so they couldn't really find a net zero energy building in which to rent or lease space in. So what they did instead was to turn to their current landlord and start what would turn into multiple years of conversations, and I mean multiple years through the actual construction process, in which they were really hand in hand, and they were very much in sync. Landlord and tenant were very much conversing. They being RMI, were able to tell Morgan Creek, this is what we're looking for. We'd really like to have a conversation about this. And Morgan Creek was then able to go out and see how they might be able to make that pencil out and see how they could make it happen. So going counterclockwise around that blue circle next, what ended up happening when the building was getting built and then eventually was built and everything was on the ground is obviously, when we're thinking about net zero, really innovative technology. We obviously have to have on-site renewable energy. In this case, it was solar panels. All of this is maybe some of the things that you're more familiar with when you think of net zero, the technology and the data and the science and all that awesome stuff that goes into a net zero building very much is in the case in Boulder Commons and in RMI's lease space within Boulder Commons. I could talk a lot about the cool technology that was there, but one thing I'll highlight, because I always think of it as a pretty cool visual that's easy to visualize even if we're not sitting in a room together, is one of the things that's installed on the entire building to help each space maintain their energy efficiency is an aero barrier. So it basically is, if you think about almost a big cushion, a big pillow of air that essentially gets infused into parts of the building envelope to lock up some of the little cracks and pieces that are naturally occurring in any sort of building construction, to seal those up with air to avoid any excess air being leaked out or, you know, excess air coming in, other than through, obviously through the HVAC and the filtration and the air system and all of that. So what that did was it just added another layer of protection and continued to help that building get to the net zero energy. So really cool technology, and there's a link to this case study in the resources tab that I've mentioned a few times. So you can go and dig through lots of data if you're into that. Then moving on to that gray bubble there. So sub-metering, you've heard toted a few times already on this webinar. You know, I'm guessing that's probably not a new term for you, but if it was at the beginning of this hour, you know, you've probably gotten a pretty good 101 and 201 about what sub-metering is. But what is particularly interesting in RMI space is that, and all of the tenants in Boulder Commons, is that they had increased transparency and visibility into their energy use and into their data. So, you know, if you think of a traditional building, even if you yourself who's sitting on this webinar right now is not, you know, the energy manager or, you know, the operations team, even if that's not your role, if you think about how your lease space traditionally works, you're not going to be able to just pull up a tab online and see, oh, this is how much energy my office space is using. That's pretty unique and pretty rare. Also fascinating if you think about the transparency that allows. So what Morgan Creek did with all of their tenants was actually use a platform called eGauge. And what you can do is actually go directly to your URL, and it's a completely open page. So if you have the direct URL, anybody on this call can pull it up. And it actually outlines and has a real-time graph about the energy usage of that specific tenant space. So I actually did a presentation back in the summer with RMI, with a colleague from RMI, talking really in depth about their space in Boulder Commons. And we pulled it up through the course of trying to prep for this presentation. And at the time, it was just a couple weeks into lockdown, and it was pretty interesting because that was the first time that she'd pulled it up since everybody had been working from home. And she was actually able to zero in and go, uh-oh, there's a few things going on that are probably still plugged in our office that don't need to be plugged in now that we've all been home for, you know, a few weeks at this point. So that increased transparency, while atypical for a traditional lease, is incredibly important if you think about especially a net zero building, but any building that's trying to achieve a higher level of energy efficiency. You know, you've heard the cliche, you know, you can't manage what you can't, or measure what you can't manage. And if you can't see it, that makes it even harder. The wall that sometimes exists between data transparency and the end user is a serious problem that sub-metering and platforms such as this can help overcome. So lastly, and I saved green lease for last because green leasing is obviously the hot button word of today. But green leasing, in my opinion, was really the vehicle that helped bring the leased spaces within Boulder Commons together in a cohesive manner. So what Morgan Creek did was they actually worked with RMI on a green lease before they moved in. And so RMI was the anchor tenant for this building. And they worked with RMI to make sure that this green lease covered everything that they needed and wanted it to. And then that actually became the template to the ensuing tenants who would come in. So it's not necessarily an identical lease for everybody, but there are some clauses that are identical and the same for everybody. And those are the really key clauses that help this building stay on track to net zero. So, you know, again, going into green lease clauses could be a whole other webinar in and of itself, but I'll just call out those four there: energy budget, recommissioning, disclosure, and cost recovery. So the energy budget is probably the most fascinating one here, in that Morgan Creek, set out an energy budget for each of their tenants. That was 7K BTU. If the tenant and their operations and their practices were what made them go over that budget, they had to be the one to financially pay for RECs to set the building back onto its net zero energy pathway. On the flip side, if it was something because of the building owner, Morgan Creek, that had the building go over their net zero energy goal, Morgan Creek would be the one who paid for the RECs. So they set this very, very simplistic in essence, but really moving way to get the building to maintain that pathway to net zero. Recommissioning, this is something that they wrote into the lease, and it's incredibly critical when you're thinking about maintaining your systems and avoiding the premature obsolescence of those systems before it's their time to go. And then lastly, disclosure, and I've already talked a little bit about the cost recovery, the RECs being part of that, but data and disclosure. They wrote all of these things directly into the green lease so that there really wasn't, there wasn't any question. And not only did RMI know exactly what they were getting into, but all of the tenants thereafter were also able to know. You can go to the next slide. So we'll close out here. I know our big focus here is tenants today, but one thing that was really nice and I don't want to say rewarding because I did not have a direct role in this, but it was enlightening to hear. This is a quote from Andy Bush of Morgan Creek Ventures, and Morgan Creek is actually a Green Pro member, full disclosure. But Andy explained that while this was not the bread and butter of Morgan Creek, this meaning net zero, uber energy efficient buildings, this was not their bread and butter before. After seeing the success of Boulder Commons and being able to walk through all of the steps that it took to get them to an aspiring net zero building, it quickly became ingrained into their company ethos and into their threads. And it is now still, they still move forward on, incredibly sustainable buildings. They're adding to Boulder Commons. Boulder Commons will be a multi-phase project. Again, net zero, still maintaining that net zero. So this is something that they were able to use this as really honestly their own case study, their own company case study, and see how they could walk through this and make it successful and make it pencil out. So this wasn't what they did before, but they saw the success here and they were able to understand how they should continue working on projects such as this. Good, next slide.
All right, thank you, Emily. Thank you all panelists, great presentations. And so now we're gonna move into the Q&A portion. I know I had sent some messages through the chat just encouraging folks to submit questions. And we are also, I think we have a nice manageable group to open it up and unmute some folks for questions as well. So I think we're going to unmute the group. And then I'm also going to start with the first question we have in the chat here, which is for all panelists. What are the main reasons why an entity pursues these programs? Is it corporate goals, compliance with city policies, etc.? And this might be different for each of you. So maybe let's start with Emily, and then this is just the order of your videos that's popping up in my screen. So I'll start with Emily, then Hannah, then Craig.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, the answer I'm sure will definitely be different for everybody. TEOP, why would you walk through this? I think the most obvious answer would be the energy and financial savings. So, if you think back to the table that I showed and what I talked about with the Boulder Commons, RMI space, there's proven numbers here that have been modeled over a number of years that demonstrate if you're walking through these 10 steps in a systematic manner, your space is going to save energy and it's going to save money for you. So I think that's first and foremost would be my answer. I think second would be, the market is moving in this direction. So whether or not you're getting, the recognition, whether or not you're checking all of the boxes of TEOP, you're going to be behind the curve if you're in a lease space or if you own an entire building and you're not factoring in energy efficiency, overall sustainability, now even health and wellness. If you're not factoring this in right now, you're really going to be behind the curve. So I think that's a motivation generally to walk through not only the TEOP steps, but why not get recognition while you're at it too?
Thanks, Emily. Go ahead, Hannah.
Sure. So I would definitely reiterate Emily's first point of the cost and energy savings. I think a big motivator is, addressing that split incentive issue. For green leases in general, that's a real tool to do that. And then for green lease leaders, I think it definitely is a combination of working towards corporate goals and then also the recognition piece, being the green lease leaders is a recognition program.
Great, thanks, Hannah.
Craig, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm last here. Not too much to add. I think all of that holds true for all of these initiatives. Financial is primary driver for a lot of people trying to make decisions. So certainly saving on those controllable costs makes a lot of sense. But in terms of corporate goals, I think, we've seen explosion over the last decade or so of corporate entities stepping up to address climate goals. Something like half of the S&P 500 or Fortune 500 companies have energy or clean energy goals that they're pursuing. There's been a number of studies on millennials and where they want to choose to work, and a significant portion, 70% or so, say that they factor that in when then choosing a place to work. So as a corporation, you're looking to reduce your footprint, you're looking to get recognition so people can see you're doing something. That's always important too. You're looking to save costs, you're looking to attract talent, generally just capitalize on moving and doing things responsibly and approaching kind of their environmental impact and reducing that as much as possible. I think everyone sees that that's the direction where things are going. So corporations have a lot of different drivers, frankly, and the data is there to really back it up that they are doing that. And high percentage of them put out sustainability reports every year as well. So I think we're seeing that in the market, and I think there's a lot of various reasons why they're going about it.
Yeah, if I can just add something on Craig's too, what he was saying got me thinking too. While it may seem far off that an investor for your company, for your lease space is specifically saying, what's your energy use of your lease space, it's really not. I mean, on Greenprint, when we work with the owners and developers, investors are demanding energy and sustainability movement. And the companies that are not specifically on the owner developer side, but that are more leasing real estate, there's no reason why they shouldn't be following suit. And investors of all shapes and sizes, Craig uses the Fortune 500 and S&P, they're demanding this stuff. They're requesting that your company be environmentally conscious and aware, and not just from a greenwashing perspective, from an actual, this is what we are doing to help meet city policies, help meet the building goals, the city standards, what have you. So it's not going away. If anything, it's accelerating. And with any luck for the people on the speaker panel, with the new administration, that will pick up. And I say that tongue in cheek, because I know that by picking up some of this, for people who are trying to meet these standards, it does become a little terrifying. But there's programs to help you get there, would be my response to that.
Yeah, I have just one other thing to add, and I don't want to borrow from the ENERGY STAR whole buildings program and mix up studies and surveys out there, but I think the same sort of principle holds true in that, as Emily was referring to investors, they see initiatives like this as a sign of good management. On the whole building side, spaces that earn ENERGY STAR certification are selling for higher prices, they are leasing up faster, they have lower vacancy rates. A lot of that is correlation, not causation, but as you can start to see that these things are taking place, investors pay attention and they want to put their dollars towards something responsible, and they want to put their dollars towards something that's being managed efficiently, because they see that as an overall sign of good management. So a lot of data there to support that as well.
That's awesome. Thank you both. Thanks to all of you for answering that question. That was the only question I see in the chat, but I think we were going to have Allie unmute everyone, but it seems like that's not the case. I think we can use reactions thing if people use like their thumbs up or the clap thing to note if they want to be unmuted, and then Allie can ask to unmute you guys if you have a question, or also you can just submit your question through the chat too.
I can
I should
hop into the
also
question.
chime in and say that.
Go ahead.
Sorry, one second. I was just going to say that Emily was talking a lot about RMI. They did go through and participate in the pilot that we did, so they do get credit for going through all three of the programs.
Thank you, Craig. They
Perfect.
did.
I'm going to tie it all together. Sorry, Andrea, I think that was you chiming in.
That was me, yeah. I guess first I wanted to make a comment. I really enjoyed what everyone had to say, really great presentations. And a quick note to Emily, I was an office manager in a Morgan Creek building in a previous life. So it is exciting to see what they've done with Boulder Commons. I can walk there from my house. I have walked there before. So I'm definitely biased towards that project in particular, but it's really cool to see them fully embracing, you know, sustainability and net zero and all of that through that project. So I'm excited to see, you know, what else they're doing as far as new projects going forward. But on a similar note, what is the best way to sell these ideas to partners or colleagues? A lot of you know that I work at Retex, so I'm more of a partner. You know, I work with other companies as a consultant type of role. So what is the best way to share these ideas? And, you know, if they're overwhelmed with, you know, between TEOP and ENERGY STAR and all of the and Green Lease Leaders and Better Buildings for that matter, you know, where's the best place to start? And is there one in particular where if they do one project first, does that make it easier to do the rest of them? What is kind of the best way for that? I'm not sure who would be best to answer, if not all of you, but thanks.
I mean, I can start because I think, you know, TEOP kicks in, you know, as soon as you're ready to start selecting a team and selecting a space. You know, you're not going to be able to get the recognition until you actually have something to recognize. To answer your question directly, if they're overwhelmed by TEOP, give them my email would be my shortest answer to that. But if they're overwhelmed by the thought of lease space efficiency, TEOP is really meant to be, you know, an entry point, a lower barrier entry point, in that it's not, you know, it's a free and open program. It's not a recognition program. It's not, you know, nobody's going to come and knock on their door if they don't check off every single box and, you know, in perfection. So it's really meant to be based on stakeholders in the industry and a lot of data and a lot of research and a lot of science behind it. It's meant to be that consolidated 10-step process, so that if lease space efficiency is overwhelming to them, start here, you know? So think about the team, think about your space. Have you asked your landlord about what your, you know, the central building systems are? What's up with the HVAC? You know, I feel like everybody's talking about HVAC now. Nobody that was before being like, what's my MERV filter? And they didn't know what MERV was 10 months ago, but, you know, have that conversation, start those conversations. And then once you get into that design and construction phase of TEOP, admittedly that some of those steps are going to be overwhelming. And when you start thinking about energy modeling and all of that, yes, you know, full disclosure, that can be really, really overwhelming. However, if you look at the financial paybacks, it's really worth it to walk through those. And if you're uncomfortable with them, there's plenty of consulting companies, you know, like Retech, like others in the market, that can help walk through that to make it a little bit less intimidating. But I think if somebody's intimidated or questioning lease space efficiency, as far as pointing out what we were talking about a moment ago, that the market's going in this direction, so it's just a matter of meeting them where they are, you know, and talking their language to help get them there. That would kind of be my response for TEOP specifically.
Awesome, thank you.
And then, I don't know, Hannah and then Craig, if we'll just go in this order. I think it makes sense.
That works for me. Yeah, I would agree, of course, with what Emily said, and also, you know, I'll note that that ENERGY STAR Tenant Space is a credit you can meet as part of Green Lease Leaders, and so that's, you know, one way that it kind of plays in there in the way that you're going through that process. And then for Green Lease Leaders, I think that it depends on, you know, what stage you're at of kind of where to start, we have a whole suite of case studies if you're just looking to explore and kind of make the case to leaders, to your leadership about what it is and what the possibilities are. But then if you're at a place where you're looking to really assess maybe your current leases, then I would suggest starting with that audit tool that will be linked in the slides provided to everyone, because that can tell you, you know, how close you'd be to recognition. It can really highlight some of the negative space that you might need to fill, which I think can really just help in the communication of making it very clear, you know, what you have done and the space in the room you have to progress.
Perfect.
Craig.
Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have too much to add. I think Hannah and Emily has summarized it well. You know, really, it's just kind of being in a space and getting in the conversation and getting in the thought process of understanding sort of efficiency there. And it doesn't have to be that complicated. It's where's our footprint here? What questions should we ask? How much energy are we using? What types of equipment do we have here? How is our building sort of working? What is our relationship with our landlord in terms of pursuing this stuff? You can start to ask a lot of questions as you sort of go to answer those questions. You'll naturally sort of gather a lot of the information you need for pursuing this. I don't know that we had an official recommendation for order. It sounds like TEOP from a process standpoint and sort of scientific approach to addressing a space. You could sort of start there. And as Hannah mentioned, if you get the ENERGY STAR recognition, there's points there for green lease leaders. So you could go in that order. But certainly you can kind of pursue some of these you know, kind of as the information presents itself. There's a lot of information you need for the ENERGY STAR Tenant Space program. So just gathering and data collection standpoint, you can start there. We have a resource on our website that kind of lists out a few of the things you can start collecting about your space so that when you go to apply, it's not overwhelming there. But then, yeah, just getting your head in that space is a good starting point, and then you can kind of pick and choose.
Perfect. Thank you all. And there was one other question that came through the chat that I can address. Slides will be made available along with the recording, so we will send all of that to you all after we get it ready to go. So you guys can expect that in an email. I don't think it takes too long for the Zoom recording. So within the next week, you guys should have that. And any other questions? I feel like people might be able to unmute themselves as well.
Am I muted or unmuted?
You're unmuted. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. I have to say this was absolutely splendid presentation. Thank you so much. Very, very relevant. I just posted a contact that I've taken a number of seminars from a company called Selling Energy, headed by Mark Jewell, who's been in this energy savings business, and his specialty is training people to use the language that the decision makers use, you know, the financial decision makers, and presenting the material not from an environmental good citizen point of view, but from the bottom line, because that's the hardest thing. People want to do this, but they're, you know, as good citizens. But he's excellent at presenting this material in the format that a financial decision maker will listen to and accept. I posted the contact information. I've taken his seminars for a couple of years now. Absolutely first rate.
That's great. Thank you, Dennis.
Thanks for
that. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any other hands up, so we might be able to wrap things up a bit early. Cool. Okay. So there's just one last slide. Allie, if you can go to that one, thank you. This is some links to the resources that our panelists touched on throughout their presentations. Again, as you get access to these slides, you'll have access to these links as well. And I just wanted to wrap things up by saying thank you to our panelists for your great presentations. Here's their contact information if you all have any questions that come up after you're looking back at these slides. And we thank you all for joining us today. I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you.